Hello, I'm Dr. Steve Vargo, and welcome to another episode of the I Own a Business podcast, where we focus on helping practice owners build the practice of their dreams. Usually in these podcasts, I'm interviewing other topic experts and deconstructing their strategies and best practices, but this episode is just going to be me. And what I'd like to talk about are a few reasons patients don't buy from you. Don't follow your treatment plans. Don't do what you want them to do, even when it seems like an obvious solution to a problem. And some of these reasons may actually surprise you. As a teaser, being good at sales is more than just educating people about a product. It's also dependent on your ability to communicate in a way that aligns with how people make decisions. And that's what we're going to focus on. So, speaking of decisions, I have a question for you. How many decisions do you think the average person makes every day? Think of a number. That was a drum roll for effect. So the other effect you may hear is some thunder in the background because I'm recording this in the middle of a thunderstorm. So I did not intend for that sound effect, but if you hear it, we'll just see how it goes. So the answer to how many decisions people make on average every day is 30,000 decisions. In fairness, a lot of these are tiny little micro decisions like what did you decide where to work today, or what did you decide to eat for breakfast? But the point is that the human brain is always in decision-making mode. Let's come back to that number in a minute and you'll better understand the relevance of that. So let's jump right into the surprising reasons that patients don't buy from you. Number one, you haven't made an emotional connection with the patient. I know that sounds touchy-feely, but there's actually a science to this that offers insight into how people actually make decisions. And when you think about it, doesn't our success as doctors correlate with our ability to influence people's decisions? Whether that's to get a diabetic to adopt healthier eating habits or get a patient to invest in new eyewear. 30,000 decisions. That's a lot. It almost seems impossible. Just imagine if I walked into your practice with a tall stack of papers and I said, "Hey, doc, I've got about 30,000 decisions here I need you to make. And I need these by the end of the day. Also, I need you to put a lot of thought into all these decisions because I don't want you to make bad decisions." How far do you think you'd get with that? Probably not very far. Here's the spoiler. That's not how we make decisions. The human brain learned a long time ago that the only way to make that many decisions every day and successfully navigate this world, it had to come up with some shortcuts. And that's how our brain operates. It uses a lot of shortcuts when it comes to decision making. And one of the main shortcuts it uses is emotions. It's feelings. How we feel about something has much more power over our decisions than what we know about something. Let me repeat that for those of you who think more information is the answer to more sales. How we feel about something has much more power over our decisions than what we know about something. Have you ever heard the phrase, people buy on emotion and they rationalize their purchase decisions with logic? There's a lot of truth to that. When we're presented with a decision, the logical side of our brain is great for things like planning and analyzing, but it kind of sucks at making decisions. If anything, it's the bottleneck of the brain. Analysis paralysis. Or is it paralysis analysis? No, I think I had it right the first time. Have you ever spent a lot of time thinking about a decision, but you didn't do anything? Nothing. You failed to act. You thought and just thought and thought some more, but you never did anything about it. That's the logical side of the brain at work. And research has actually shown that 95% of our decisions don't occur at a logical level. It occurs at a subconscious level triggered by feelings, not logic. It's not that information isn't important in the sales process. It's that information often fails to connect with the true decision maker, the decision-making side of our brain, which is the emotional side of the brain. That's what I mean when I said make an emotional connection. So I'll share a quick story with you about a personal friend of mine who I saw years ago for a contact lens exam. So This was a college friend of mine, and he came in for a contact lens exam, and I had seen him several times. And by his own admission, he'd tell you that he wasn't the most compliant patient when it came to contact lens safety. And he would often sleep in his contacts and wear them well past the recommended wearing times. And as time went by, he did start to develop some concerning problems, most notably corneal neovascularization. And from an information standpoint, I had educated him on all these findings along with my recommendations at his 2 previous exams. Yet here we were. The condition had gotten worse, and my friend confessed that he changed his ways for a brief period of time and then drifted back into his old habits. So at this exam, I decided I was going to try a different approach. I turned to my computer and I pulled up a picture of corneal neovascularization. And this is obviously a condition I had educated him about numerous times. I gave him the information. He had the information. And I pulled up a picture, and then I turned my computer screen towards him. And I pointed at the picture. And what happened next really became a true aha moment for me as a clinician, and maybe more important, as a communicator. He glanced at the picture and almost immediately looked away. And it was clear from the expression on his face that he finally got it. And he said to me, "That's what's happening to my eyes? That looks awful." And he literally begged me to close out the picture and promised me he would take his contacts out at night. He goes, I will take them out. I'll do whatever you want me to do. And I remember just leaning back in my chair and thinking to myself, this is oddly fascinating. I've been educating you on this condition ad nauseum for 3 years and telling you what to do and giving you the information. And all I had to do was show you a picture. So what was the major difference here? When I educated him, I got him to think differently. But a simple picture got him to feel differently about the condition. The images can be a great way to tap into the emotional side of people's brains. Stories can be very effective as well. Sharing stories about a patient who's had success with your products or services, or patients who opted not to follow your guidelines or recommendations, and they suffered for it. They suffered negative outcomes. Another way to make an emotional connection is simply ask more questions and get a deeper understanding of the patient's problems and concerns and how those issues are affecting the patient. So for the next week, here's what I want you to do. Pay attention to the commercials and marketing ads you see. Pay attention to the music and the message and the story. Great marketing is not dependent on what's conveyed. It's dependent on how it's conveyed. Companies and brands emotionally connect with you. What are they doing to accomplish that? Is that something you can borrow for your practice and your brand? Work that into your internal messaging, external marketing, and even your conversations with patients. People buy on emotion and rationalize with logic. So don't skip over that emotion part. Make a connection. Don't jump right to the logic part, which is a lot of times what we do as clinicians. Reason number 2 that people don't buy from you. Confused people don't buy anything. That's actually not my quote. That's Dr. Robert Cialdini, who wrote the massively popular book, Influence. Confused people don't buy anything. Is it possible, in our attempts to be very thorough and detailed when we're educating patients, that we end up confusing them? Let me share a few stats with you. 1 in 3 American patients report leaving their doctor's office not knowing what they were told or what they're supposed to do. That's not good. I've heard doctors say, well, that's not an issue with me because I see the patient nodding their head up and down when I'm talking, so I know that they understand what I'm saying. According to the Institute for Healthcare Advancement, guess what the number 1 source of miscommunication is between patient and provider? The head nod. You're talking, the patient's nodding their head, and you assume that that's an indication that they're comprehending everything you're saying, when actually it's just a polite gesture to indicate that they're listening. So hang with me here because this gets worse. 40 to 80% of the information patients are told during office visits is forgotten immediately. And 50% of what they remember is incorrect. Isn't it interesting that whenever a friend or a relative tells you about something their eye doctor told them, assuming that it wasn't you, that they almost always butcher the explanation? I mean, they were present the whole time the doctor was talking. I assume the doctor spoke in the patient's native language, and yet here they are sharing these bits and pieces of what they remember and asking you what it all means. Well, guess what your friend or relative probably didn't do? Tell their doctor that they don't understand, because most patients won't. They just nod their head. Confused people don't buy anything. Why do patients forget most of what you tell them? I'll suggest it's because we're overwhelming them with too much information. In fairness, that's how we were taught to do it in school. Educate the patient on every clinical finding, treatment option, side effect, instructions, potential outcomes, what else, right? Anything we can think of. And then they'd still send us back in saying we didn't educate the patient enough. You forgot to tell them this and that. And then what do we do as doctors? Then after all that, we send them to the optical, where an optician educates them on frame styles, materials, lens options, tints, coatings. And we haven't even gotten to trying to explain their insurance benefits to them. Here's a question for you. When you go to the grocery store, how many items before you have to write them down? For me, it's 3. And to be honest, I'm not even sure at 3 that something's not going to slip my mind. What's your number? Now, maybe your memory is better than mine, and maybe it's more than 3, but it's probably still a small number, right? So why are we expecting patients to remember so much information? That 40 to 80% I'm referencing is information that's forgotten immediately. After a few days, that number drops to under 10%. I don't think it's because patients aren't paying attention. I think more likely it's because they're human beings with limited capacity to absorb and retain large amounts of information. If there's anything we learned in optometry school that I really hope we shed, it's this belief that more education is the answer to patient noncompliance. That more information is the path to more sales. Is education important? Yes, of course it is. It's a cornerstone of what we do. Is it possible to overeducate? Yes, I believe it is. Let me define overeducating as educating to the point of overwhelm and confusion. Confused people don't buy anything. This is a lesson I actually learned from public speaking. When I share lists of information on stage, the proverbial death by PowerPoint, I lose the audience every single time. It took a professional speaking coach to get me to try a different approach. Simplify the message. The more focused I got when delivering a message, the more engaged the audience became. From a communication standpoint, I think you'll find the same applies in the exam room. A clear and focused message is a powerful message. Something else my speaking coach told me that I'll always remember was this. Great communicators don't take the simple and make it complex. They take the complex and make it simple. My coach alleviated my concerns about oversimplifying my message by reminding me that I could share whatever information I wanted. I just needed to decide what I was going to share on stage and what I could put together in a handout or an online resource the audience could access after the talk to learn more about the topic. If you try to share all that information, you risk confusing the audience. And as we've established, you can probably say it now by yourself without me. Confused people don't buy anything, right? Write that down somewhere. So keep the message simple and focused, and utilize other resources like handouts or online resources where the patient can learn more about the topic later if needed. If you're not getting the outcomes you want in terms of patient adherence, optical sales, or any other aspect of your business, then evaluate your messaging. And remember, one last time for the people in the back, confused people don't buy anything. The third surprising reason patients don't buy from you, they haven't made a commitment. There's a popular restaurant in Chicago called Gordon's. It's a Gordon Ramsay restaurant. And they had a problem that a lot of us have, a lot of doctors have, but maybe on a different scale. They were actually losing $900,000 a year as a result of no-shows. They had a 30% no-show rate. So you may not be losing close to $1 million in no-shows, but for most practices, that's still an issue they have to contend with. So remarkably, in this case, the restaurant was able to drastically reduce its no-show rate with one simple change to the reservation process. In the past, when taking a reservation, a Gordon's employee would say, please call us if you change your plans. And with this approach, 3 out of every 10 reservations resulted in a no-show. There's your 900,000. So this is not working. This plan is not working real well. So Gordon's, they decided to try something a little bit different. Instead of saying, please call us if you change your plans, they changed this to, will you please call us if you change your plans? And then they waited for the caller to answer. The result? No-shows plummeted from 30% to 10%. Any idea why such a slight, seemingly insignificant twist in wording would have such a profound impact on getting people to do what you asked? Well, the answer lies in something that's been studied in great detail and can be a powerful force in getting people to take action: the power of a commitment. Please call us if you change your plans is an instruction, and it doesn't require a commitment any more than telling a patient to take his contact lenses out at night or a diabetic to start exercising more. Will you call us if you change your plans, and then waiting for an answer requires a commitment, and commitments demand action. In psychology, they refer to this as consistency, people's desire to be consistent with what they say and do. For anyone who's read the book Influence by Dr. Cialdini, this was one of the key principles of being more influential, was seeking a commitment from others. Dr. Cialdini mentioned in his book, once we make a choice or take a stand, we'll encounter personal and interpersonal pressures to behave consistently with that commitment. In short, not being consistent with our commitments is perceived as a character weakness associated with dishonesty and unreliability. To reiterate, commitments demand action. Instructions and recommendations do not. Getting someone to publicly commit, verbally commit to taking action transfers some ownership of the process over to them, where being told or instructed what to do in a one-way fashion, which is the approach many doctors take, is less effective with inspiring action. So how can you make this relatable to a typical interaction in a doctor's office? How do we move past just giving instructions that the patient may or may not follow to getting a commitment from the patient that increases the chances the patient will do what we're asking them to do? Well, you ask for a commitment. You can come up with your own wording that you're comfortable with, but I'll give you a suggested approach. It's important that the tone reflects concern and not necessarily authority. We tend to respond better to people who act out of concern for us, where we can sometimes be resistant to people we perceive to be demanding. So here's an easy 2-step process for getting a patient's commitment. Step 1, mention your commitment to the patient. For example, Ms. Smith, I'm 100% committed to doing everything I can to make sure that you have the best possible outcome. Step 2 is asking for the patient's commitment in return. But for that to happen, Ms. Smith, that's going to require both of us to commit to the treatment plan that we agreed on. So can I count on you to follow through with what we discussed? Then wait for the patient to answer. This is the commitment that you're looking for. And again, we want to make sure that we don't cross that line of being perceived as pushy, but rather we want patients to see us as concerned healthcare professionals who want what's best for the patient. When we go first and mention our commitment, it kind of leans into that principle of reciprocity, or what they call the law of reciprocity, which is actually another one of the core principles out of Dr. Cialdini's book, that when we give something to somebody else, whether that's our time, our money, our effort, our concern, that they're more likely to want to give back. So I like the approach of mentioning our commitment first and leading with that, because my hope is that they'll want to give back in return in the form of giving their commitment to the process. To alleviate any concerns over coming across as demanding, I like to use the term soft commitment language, and that might sound like this. Are you on board with what I'm saying? Is this something you can commit to? Do you agree with this approach? All these questions require a verbal commitment, but in a way that respects the patient's preferences. And what if the answer is no? What if the patient can't or won't commit to what you're asking them to do? This might sound like something negative, but actually it's a good thing. Asking someone for their commitment creates an opportunity for them to say no. If what you're asking the patient to commit to just feels too lofty for the patient at this time, then politely inquire about their main concerns and then try to meet them where they're at. What would they be willing to commit to at this time? Maybe your patient who smokes 2 packs a day isn't ready to quit cold turkey. Would he cut back to 1 pack a day? The same process applies in the optical as well. What would somebody be willing to commit to? If we can get to that, if we can meet them where they're at, we'll probably have much more success, whether that's dealing with clinical outcomes or product sales. I think sometimes we approach sales with an all or nothing mindset, and we miss opportunities to help patients and the practice, but on a smaller scale. If you're truly committed to the health and well-being of your patients, is it reasonable to ask for the patient's commitment in return? I think it is. It requires both parties to achieve the best possible outcome. Does the patient's verbal commitment guarantee that they'll follow through? No, it doesn't. Does it improve the chances that they'll follow through? According to research, yes, it absolutely does. And while it may feel a little awkward to ask a patient for their commitment to a health goal, to the patient, it's probably just going to sound like you genuinely care. These tend to be the patients who come back to you and say, thank you. You really made a difference. At the start of this podcast, I mentioned that being good at sales is more than just educating people about a product. It also is dependent on your ability to communicate in a way that aligns with how people make decisions. I hope that makes more sense to you now. And I also hope you found this helpful. And I'd love to get your thoughts and feedback on it and what's worked for you in your practice. And let me know. Maybe I'll share that on a future episode. So feel free to reach out to me at svargo, that's SVARGO at idoc.net. I'd love to hear from you. And speaking of iDoc, if we can help you in any way, build your practice, grow your practice, reach out as well. You can find out more about iDoc at iDoc, that's idoc.net. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.